One of my subscribers, with a wine collection valued at around $30,000, recently asked me to take a look at his holdings and to let him know if I'd had any recommendations. I thought this might be a fun idea for a YouTube video, and that my analysis may benefit some other viewers as well. So in this video, I'm going to review this subscriber's wine collection, identify the strengths and what I perceive to be gaps or weaknesses, and then explain what I would do if this were my wine collection. If you like this idea for a video, please let me know in the comments below. I'm thinking about turning it into a series, much like I do with my wine cellar tour videos. Before drilling down into the details, a high-level overview of this subscriber's collection is informative. He has around 600 bottles, and the average cost per bottle is about $50. He does not have any specific wine goals for me to evaluate this collection. Rather, he said that he enjoys purchasing wine on his travels, and he also enjoys trying new things. He gave examples that he's visited both Bordeaux and Napa Valley recently, and purchased a number of wines on those trips that he's added to his collection. He also advised that he consumes about 4 to 6 bottles per week along with his family, and that there is not much room for him to expand his collection. With that by way of background, I'll start to get a little bit more granular in my analysis. In terms of countries represented, by far the dominant weighting in this collection is wines from the United States. In fact, more than 60% of the bottles are from the United States, and almost half of these bottles are from California. In terms of value, around 2/3 of the value of this collection comes from wines in the United States. The country with the second highest weighting in this collection is France, which comes in at about 25%, and 23% of the collection is from Bordeaux. Italy is next with around 6.5% of the holdings, and the only other countries that have more than 1% represented are Argentina and Spain, which both have around 1.5%. Next, I'll identify a few of the strengths of this wine collection. First, I like the fact that there's a heavy emphasis on high quality to price ratio wines. In fact, I recognize a number of them from wines that I featured in my videos, which shows that this collector has high intelligence. Examples include Cantenac Brown, Lopez Heredia, Smith Madrone, and Domaine Druhan from Willamette Valley. I also like the fact that a number of the bottles in this collection are wines that this collector purchased on his wine trips. This is certainly a nice way to go. In addition to supporting the wineries that you visit, it's always nice to be able to open bottles and remember the times when you visited these properties. Another strength of this collection is that there's plenty of wines that are ready to enjoy in the near term. Especially with this collector enjoying 4 to 6 bottles per week, that's going to be extremely important. This will definitely help this subscriber ensure that he does not suffer from the same problem that I had. Specifically, a couple years in, I had 300 or 400 bottles in my collection, but the vast majority of them required additional bottle age before I could open them. So it was incredibly frustrating when I wanted to open some wine, and I had 300 or 400 bottles in my cellar, but very few of them that were ready to enjoy. But if there's a silver lining, it's that this predicament led me to come up with a wine cellar defender concept. The other thing I like about this collection is that there's very few bottles on the very low end. In fact, if you were going to plot the value of these wines on a graph, it would be a bit like a bell curve, where the vast majority of the wines are in the $30 to $70 range, and there's not that many outliers on either the low end or the high end. Now that I've discussed some of the strengths of this wine collection, it's time to shift gears and discuss some of the gaps, or what I consider to be weaknesses. The biggest problem that I see with this collection is that it lacks diversification. Specifically, 60% of the bottles are from the United States, and when you take into account the Napa Valley wines, the Washington State wines, and the Bordeaux wines, more than 70% of the bottles in this collection are Bordeaux blends. While it's certainly good to have plenty of wines that you enjoy at your disposal, my concern is that this collection appears to be headed down the same path where I got into trouble when I first started collecting. Specifically, when I first started collecting wine, I made lots of trips to California and purchased lots of wines there. I also signed up for a lot of mailing lists and received a number of recurring shipments. Then, by the time I started traveling to places like France, Italy, Spain, South America, and more, I was already heavily overweight in California wines. Another concern that I have with this collection is that there's not enough special wines or wines at the high end. I think it's important that everyone have at their disposal some special occasion wines for situations when they're celebrating birthdays, anniversaries, good days, bad days, or when they're meeting with their wine tasting group. Another concern that I have is that there's extremely few white wines and sparkling wines in this collection. While I don't have the precise numbers, I would dare say that probably 90% of the collection is red wines. While I certainly understand preferring red wine, and my collection to this day is certainly red wine dominant, I found that it's also extremely valuable to have a number of white wines in my collection and also some sparkling wines. This is so for several reasons. First, oftentimes these wines make excellent food pairings with something that I'm going to have for dinner. Additionally, oftentimes the wine tasting group will have various themes for the tastings. So, for example, they may say to take a Rhone red and a white from Alsace, or something similar. For that reason, it's helpful to have a number of different white wine options in your collection in case you have a specific food pairing or a use case come up with your tasting group. Also, sometimes you'll be visiting with clients, friends, or others who are extremely interested in wine, and if they come over to enjoy some wine with you, it may be that they like a certain type of wine that isn't necessarily in your wheelhouse. For example, one of my clients was really into Aubert Chardonnay, so I was fortunate that I had a few bottles in my collection at that time, and when he came over to enjoy some wine, he really enjoyed it. Since this collector appears to enjoy robust red wines, another category that seems to be underrepresented in this collection is Rhone wines. In fact, I see that there's only about 4 bottles of Rhone wines in this collection, 3 of which are from the south, and only 1 of which is from the north. In my view, Northern Rhone red wines are some of the most special wines that are being made today. So I would highly encourage this collector to add some Northern Rhone reds to his collection from places like Côte-Rôtie, Hermitage, and Cornas. In addition, Châteauneuf-du-Pape, Gigondas, and other parts of the Southern Rhone are also making some outstanding wines, many of which represent compelling values. So it might be a good idea to add some of those to the collection as well. Another thing that jumped out at me as I reviewed the holdings is that there's very few Super Tuscan wines in this collection. Since this subscriber really enjoys Bordeaux blends, he definitely may want to consider getting some Bordeaux blends from places like Bulgari. While I'm on the subject of Italian wines, particularly if this collector enjoys Italian cuisine, I also definitely recommend more Sangiovese-based wines, such as Brunello di Montalcino and Chianti Classico. I do see that there are several bottles of 2019 Brunello di Montalcino in this collection, which is terrific, as that was an outstanding vintage for Brunello. Nevertheless, it would be a good idea to add some more to the collection because those will go quickly once they are ready to enjoy. I also think that Spain is underrepresented in this collection with only around 9 bottles or so. Particularly for someone who enjoys robust red wines, Spain is a terrific place for some exceptional collectible wines, particularly those that offer compelling value. So I would also encourage this collector to look for additional wines from Rioja, like the Lopez de Heredia wines in his collection, and also consider red wines from places such as Ribera del Duero and Priorat. With that by way of background, it's time for me to reveal 3 takeaways or action items that I would immediately implement if this were my wine collection. In my opinion, the most urgent and the most important action item for this particular collector is to immediately scrutinize extremely closely all the mailing lists or wine clubs in which he is a member and in which he receives automatic or recurring shipments. Really, the only reason to be on one of those lists and to purchase wines in this way is if it's difficult or impossible to get these wines in the secondary market, or if the price directly from the producer is much more favorable than that in the retail channels. In that regard, I'll note that I reviewed the list of wines in this collection and I didn't see anything that jumped out at me as being in either of those two categories. This is definitely something that I learned the hard way. At one point in time, my collection included more than 100 bottles of wine from 2 different California-based producers. So even if I stopped purchasing wine from those producers altogether and had 1 bottle of each of their wines per month, it would take me more than 8 years to work through those bottles. So certainly that was a bit ridiculous and something that I don't want to happen to this collector. For those of you who are curious, I'm currently purchasing wine actively only on 2 different mailing lists, each of which send me only 3 bottles per year at the most, and in both cases, those are wines that are very, very difficult to get in the secondary market, and if you purchase them there, they're much more expensive than the price to purchase them direct from the producer. Cutting back on these recurring shipments will definitely help this wine collection to become more balanced and more diversified over time, but another action item that I would implement in the next 4 to 6 months is to focus my efforts on purchasing wines from some of the gaps that I identified earlier in this video. So for example, that could include white wines, sparkling wines, Rhone reds from both the north and the south, Bordeaux blends from places like Bulgari, some Spanish red wines, and so forth. But before you just run out and start buying a lot of wine that you haven't tried before, it's definitely important to try before you buy whenever possible, or to just buy a small number of bottles in each category, and then try it before you start adding additional bottles in that category to your collection. When I talk about filling the gaps in this collection, I'm also talking about getting more special occasion wines added to the mix. So I would definitely keep an eye out for opportunities to add some more coveted collectible wines to this collection as well. You could do that either 1 bottle per month, for example, or maybe if you spend, for example, $1,000 a month on wine, rather than buying 20 bottles, look to buy maybe 5 to 8 bottles that cost a little bit more on average. For more information regarding specific wines that I recommend in some of the categories discussed in this video, please check out the links in the description below. And for those of you who'd like more wine collecting advice, please be sure to check out this video that's linked above, where I discuss 12 wine collecting strategies.